Hi everyone, welcome tonight. I'm here tonight. I'm Mathieu from GB Books. I'm with Demetria Glace, long hair, and I'm with Emilie Baltz, short hairs. We are here tonight to have a short talk about the Leaked Recipes Cookbook we just published together. Before to start, I want to thank the MIT Open Documentary Labs who helped us to build the book, and of course, ITFA Doc Labs. I want, who is, I'm sorry, just some technical problem to start. I want to thank ITFA Doc Lab because we meet each other with Demetria and Emilie 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, times fly, in Amsterdam for this amazing festival. Demetria, you built an amazing performance, a dinner. It was called the Leaked Recipes Dinner. Can we start with this first experience we all built together? Yeah.
Sure. Hi everyone. So I met Mathieu and actually Emilie as well 2 years ago at ITFA in Amsterdam in the Doc Lab performances. They had a theme around cooking, and I was making a cookbook based on recipes I'd found in email leaks. So I hadn't really formed a book. I just had an idea that I wanted to make a cookbook, but never really thought that I might. And ITFA invited me to do live performances where I would invite a number of people, and we would come and eat the food from these leaks, but we'd also talk about the themes that were within them. So obviously privacy, security, leaks, and then other themes that came out, like conspiracy theories, office culture, gender dynamics of recipe writing, the recipes themselves, of course. So I did about 9 different meals, ranging from brunch to high tea, and then 2 special dinners. And the dinners were 4 courses, and each course had a different theme. For each dinner, around 40 people came probably. Mathieu and David were 2 of them. And we did a proper kind of restaurant. So we cooked lots of the food. And I worked with a chef in Amsterdam, so like a professional chef, Matthijs van den Nagel. And he cooked these meals that I'd only cooked at home, but kind of badly. And he did them professionally. And so we ate the food, and then each course I kind of had this theme. And at the end we had a trivia game where we talked about some of the interesting things I wanted to bring out from the book and from the project. So that's kind of how it came about. And then Mathieu and David saw that maybe it could become an actual cookbook. I kind of made a printed version that for the people that was like very DIY. And I think it was a good opportunity for people to eat the food in a relaxed environment and talk about these really big issues. So that's how it started.
That was crazy because my first experience with the project was food, but for you, Emilie, it was totally different.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I was positioned right next to Gabby. So during that year, which I believe was 2018 now, right?
Yeah.
2018. Long ago in time, the world has changed so much. I had presented a project also at the ITFA Doc Lab, and I think for context for the audience that maybe doesn't know what that is, ITFA is the International Documentary Film Festival. That is one of the preeminent film festival section called Doc Lab, which explores new media and emerging forms of storytelling, specifically through the lens of documentary and how documentary can affect our stories of reality. So I think hopefully I do that some justice. But so I think I was, stationed actually next to Gabby in 2018 with a very different project, also dealing with food though, called Eat Tech Kitchen, which was created in collaboration with Claudine van de Zanderslip, who's a Dutch-based artist. And we were exploring the effects of technology and our consumption habits around it. So using food as a metaphor for how we consume our daily lives and also how our daily lives consume us. So I think that this overlap between both of our interests, Demetria, your interest in technology as well as mine, I think from different points of entry was really, really fascinating. And I also remember smelling like trails of the dinners, which I did not participate in, but I remember the aftermath of it. Our project dealt directly with creating a futurist chef that was embedded within a Google Home. So you could have a Q&A with this futuristic chef, and it would ask you absurd questions and literally spit out by printing absurd recipes that you would then create in this fictional kitchen space. We used no food that was cookable, mostly like candy and telephone every now and then. But ours, I think, being grounded in a performative act. And in many ways, Demetria, I think of your work as almost ingesting the performance, that you have the stories inside of you in a very direct way of, I think, eating these email leaks that have been so provocative in our world and also so possible because of our digital world.
And this is the name of the. Oh, sorry, Emilie. This is the name of the talk. It's so provocative. It's time to cook the conspiracy. This is. It's not the only point of the book, but this is one of the aspects of the book. You can eat conspiracy. You can eat task evasion. You can eat all this smell of the time.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious also, Demetria, how you happened upon this. Like, what was the origin, the inspiration for the project in the very beginning? Was it an interest in conspiracy? Was it data mining? Where did it start for you?
Well, I'm interested in open data, so public data that is available to anyone with an internet connection. And so Leaks is a part of this. And I signed up for a project probably 4 or 5 years ago called The Good Life. And it's a really amazing art project that delivered the Enron emails. So the emails from 20 years ago from this big energy giant Enron that the US government was investigating for massive corruption and fraud. And as part of this investigation, the US, I think it was the Federal Energy Commission, put up these emails from 156 of the top employees of Enron online. And they did this in early 2000s. And they put it up online because they wanted to invite people to firstly understand what had happened at the company, but also to help them with the investigation. So kind of crowd solving. And I think they've been interviewed since, and in hindsight, I don't think they would ever have released that much information online. We're talking over 500,000 emails. And, a lot of personal data was left in them, people's addresses, telephone numbers, directions how to get into people's houses for some of the dinner parties. The Good Life by Tiga Brain and Sam Levine, they sent you these emails every day into your kind of regular email inbox. So I set my settings that every day I would receive 100 of these Enron emails. So that I think in like 3 years' time, I would have read everything. And they send it to you in order of when they were sent. So sometimes you'd have to wait like the same amount of time you'd have to wait in real life. So you would wait 2 days for a reply. So one of the emails I received after about 5 months of getting these emails was a recipe. And it was a recipe for a dessert that's in the book called Bananas Foster. And speaking of smelling it, like you're saying, Matthew, I've actually got my banana candle lit right now. I made these scents. I got a lockdown project, so I made the scents of the book. So I've got my banana candle. going. And so I found this email came through, and it was talking about this banana Foster's recipe, and her colleague was disagreeing with how it was made. So she was saying, I actually think we should add more bananas and less liquor. And they had this back and forth that I was kind of waiting for, because I had to wait to get the responses. And I was just really curious. I was thinking, well, who's right? What is this dessert? Also, I've never heard of a bananas Foster. And who is correct? And that's where it all started. And then after seeing that recipe, I started to want to find more recipes. So instead of waiting for these 100 emails, I went through the Enron emails searching for recipes. And then I moved from Enron to all the other publicly available data leaks, searching for recipes. So keywords, I probably used 40 keywords to find the recipes that made those dinners and that made the book. So that's kind of how it all started. It was from this project.
Fascinating. The desire to learn what bananas Foster is, but also I hear too, just so it seems like there was a real human interest story suddenly within this incredible data set, and something that we struggle with so much in the digital age.
Is this my audio that's gone?
No. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I missed your question.
Okay. No, I was just saying it sounds also like you had a real human interest story suddenly appear in the midst of all of this technology, something that really piqued some kind of emotion in you as well.
Yeah, definitely. And, this was the dish that I served my friends, and we made the two comparisons to see what was better. And it was a dish that we served at IDFA to, I think, 42 people cast their vote on which they preferred. So it was also this you're invested in it, and it was the same with all the recipes, as you became really attached to them. Like, these are kind of dear recipes of people, special recipes that they're sharing with colleagues or their loved ones outside of their companies, and you want to give them that respect as well. So and then trying to get in touch with everyone was an important part of the book. So trying to email them, to find their email, reach out to them, ask them for permission, to interview them about their recipe, and use that as a starting point to then talk about some more of the difficult questions, like what was it like to be in a leak, and what impact are you having now, and do I have permission to use your recipe in this cookbook? And things like this. So I anonymized all their recipes. So took out all the names, all the addresses, and then tried to get permission, which was probably a very strange email for most people that got it, and most people didn't reply. But the people that I spoke to, it was probably the most important part of the project. Yeah.
Did you have any surprises? Anything come up that you were not expecting?
With people that I spoke with, or just generally?
No, well, generally I imagine 2020 is full of surprises, but more so in the conversation with the potential participants.
Yeah, I think I was surprised I spoke to some people all from the same company, and their experience was completely different from the leak. So some people, their data was, it depended when they joined the company. Their data was available online compared to others. So two people at the same company might have had a completely different experience. These kind of things I found really fascinating. That you're all going through this shared experience in a company, but the impact is so much bigger for different people. And then some really strange coincidences. Like, my absolute favorite is someone I interviewed who, it was her grandma's recipe that made it into the book. And she was eating the recipe at her grandmother's house when she found out about the email leak.
Wow.
So it was this really weird, circular, it just really, just a really strange coincidence that. And then I asked her, what would your grandma think about the recipe being in this recipe book, her recipe? And she asked her, and she said that she got a real kick out of it. So it must be such a bizarre thing to happen that that the leaked recipe is your recipe that you are eating as you found out about the leak that was on Christmas Eve. So these kind of stories that came out with it were super strange. And just coming from a simple starting point, I think that was like you explore it through recipes, but everyone has an opinion about food, and everyone can talk about food, and then being able to talk about so much more than that. I think that was why this project was so exciting to do.
Yes, and especially because you have this big gap between something super public and super hot. It's politics, it's conspiracy, it's something very important for a country or for the world. And on the other hand, you have this very intimate material. Most of the recipes are shared between nobody and nobody, between nobody and his mom or his grandmother. It's something very personal, without something interesting for the public and without something interesting about fiscal law or public law or politics. It's a good tension. It's very interesting to talk about this tension between when you are exposed without interest.
Exactly, like something that's very, very personal, but not too personal that it's like personal because but it doesn't tell people too much about you. I felt like when I was thinking about this project, when I found my first recipe and I started to look for others, I talked to a lot of people about whether this was icky or not icky, or like how does this feel in terms of potentially, like, I didn't want to re-traumatize anyone or make light of something serious. And I felt going through that process was really important for me to come to feel confident that I was doing this in a responsible way. Because I think leaks are quite a difficult thing to get our heads around, because a lot of these email leaks some of them are released by governments. So Hillary Clinton's emails that had the salad dressing that I never got. But then you have, the N1 emails are released by governments. And then the others are released by, hacking mainly. And they're usually security companies or political entities. And they can have huge amounts of damage. But also some of them contain very useful information. For example, the hacking team leak. The hacking team is an Italian security company that through the leak you could see exactly who they were selling their software to, which governments, the checks that they were making, which is really useful information for human rights organizations, for instance. But then you also had recipes. So I think that for me, I really wanted to find a way that we could talk about email leaks, and I could understand email leaks and how I felt about them. And so when I was going through the leaks, I tried to not look around the recipes, just stay focused on the recipes and not read about people's lives. And for me, like, having that distinction, at least, it was important. But yes, I don't know. This is how I approached it. But it's an icky subject, which is why, if I may, I really wanted with Emilie, one of the important things with the visuals was to convey that sense of kind of ickiness and like voyeurism, which she did so well. So I just wanted to hear more about. I don't know, sorry, Matthew, if you had a question.
No, it's not a question, but I can do the transition, because on the bookmaking we face several problems and questions. Like, we are based in France, and most of our books are bilingual, and it was a real question to have this book first bilingual. It was impossible to find a way to put all the information for a cookbook in French and in English on the same page. And this is one of the question, but several other ones like how we can illustrate this book. It's very difficult. If you look on your mother, grandmother, or on your shell books, you have so many different cookbooks because it's so trendy. Cookbooks fits with life, fits with fashion, and it's super hard to translate 20 years of hacking and technology and office culture in one cookbook. This is why we drop the problem to Emilie.
What a problem it was. Well, I think it is. It's interesting because we had a lot of these kinds of conversations early on when we were going through different concepts, I think, for how to bring this to life. And I think the themes that you touched upon, Demetria, as well as the problematic that you bring up, Mathieu, is really interesting and was at heart of what I was. I'm also interested in these places. I'm interested in moments of tension. I'm interested in spaces where we feel slightly awkward because I think that they're most human. You know, any kind of end of the spectrum sets us up in a binary, and I think that's not ever how we experience the world. You know, we always experience it somehow, somewhere in conflict, in some little tension, you know, even ourselves in nature or ourselves in our health or our identity. Like there's constant negotiation. So I really, first of all, was attracted to just the feeling and the emotion behind these questions and behind the topic because they feel true to me. And then, you know, as we were thinking about them, there were a couple different lenses to put on it, quite literally, was, well, one of the big questions is, well, whose recipes are these? You know, where do they come from? What is the provenance, or like the terroir, to use the French word? And that was interesting to me, that the fact that they most likely also were typed in offices, but had really different personalities that I didn't know anything about and almost didn't want to know anything about, I think for similar reasons, Demetria. And at the same time, the ability, you know, to peek into someone's private life is a very voyeuristic, and I think also with all the digital media that we have around us in today's day and age, also has become fetishized. Like we're always looking into someone's life. We're always also now performing for everybody, you know, to make that more seductive. So there's a question of not only our gaze onto the image, but the way the image gazes back at us to attract us. And that was it. Those were themes that I was really interested in evoking within these photographs. So if you see the book, it's all of the recipes were created in my childhood home. I was in Illinois. Due to COVID, my husband, son, and I left, and we ended up living with my mom, who I think is listening out here. I know my mom, who's also French. So it was also a really lovely synthesis of two cultures too. I think just thrilled to be able to work with a French publisher on such a topic. But cooked all the recipes and photographed all of them, styled all of them, and chose this aesthetic that referenced like slight fetishized imagery. So all the backgrounds are silks to create, and then there's an over filter that sort of is like a dream filter that often was referenced, you know, in like 1970s pornography images, as well as like beauty shots, you know, the things that are supposed to make us look beautiful, make us desirable. And the materiality to that, in high contrast then with a just giant amount of technology from the last, I'd say about 20 years, that I spent hours and hours on eBay looking for, contacting people, ordering like microchips, you know, floppy disks, old keyboards, the weirdest mouse in the world, which is the coconut shrimp recipe, which I just love, which also sort of looks like a ball gag.
I love this one too. It's an amazing one.
Yeah. So, you know, the technology was chosen to reference, obviously, office culture, as are different props you see, you know, file folders, notepads, pens, pencils, paper clips in it. And then the way that I was attracted to styling it was that it would also be a little destructive. And the images span a spectrum across that. Like in some images, the food totally destroys the technology. Like it just eats it, which has this kind of like slight playful violence to it that I think is also part of this question that happens when we are allowed to look into people's private lives without their permission. So I think that emotion is something I was interested in evoking. And once again, the spectrum of that. So some are very playful, because I think, to your point, Demetria, also I think some people were tickled by it, from what I heard from you, and other people were most likely very provoked. So the attempt with the imagery was not only to show the food and the recipes, and to make it attractive and seductive for a viewer, which I hope we were able to achieve, through color palette and some good old highlights, but also create an emotion within people as they're going through them that references things that maybe they aren't super conscious of. I think, again, these references of pornographic images, of seductive beauty images are all in there. Along with some very odd styling decisions that were super conscious, from literally, food eating the tech, to, I think, very pretty. There's some images I think that are very pretty also, but that I've always tried to hit a slight amount of awkward tension within them. I think even the sort of prettier images are still slightly tense in their prettiness. So that, I think, that's the process behind it, trying to mix all of these different cultures and all of these different stories while still making something that I think also reflects, Demetria, your playful approach to this work, which we talked about a lot, is that the playful nature of it, the exploratory nature, the curiosity of it, is represented also in these images. Mostly I think through pastels too. Like all of the backgrounds are these sort of washed out pastel-y colors that are dreamy and in a little bit of contrast to the juicy food colors. So that is, and then there's a bunch of other strange things that happened along the way, but that's mostly a couple months spent in the basement of my childhood home with some very understanding family members. Really, really helped bring this to life.
But in comment, you, Emilie, and you, Demi, it's during 1 year, 1.5 years, you cooked and you ate each of the recipes for different reasons, because you want to write this universal way to write recipes, and you, because you cooked in a way in order to shoot and to immortalize each of them, the recipes. But in the same time, except for you, Demi, because you are vegetarian, so it was hard for you because half of the book is not vegetarian. But it was a tension between experience, cooking, and making a piece of art. In this case, a book.
Exactly. It was I've made these recipes, the ones I can eat, so many times. And because we, like you said, we had to do this like a cookbook. We had to say how many people it would serve. And we had to say, there were some questions, but it was quite important. We had these discussions together with you, Mathieu, and David, where we were trying to, if there were misspellings in the recipe, if there were clearly errors in the recipe, would we amend them? Would we change them to help the cook, the people that were going to cook these recipes? Because we designed the cookbook that people would cook the food, and I was very keen that these recipes should remain exactly how I found them. And there's some kind of hints. I put some hints in there if we really needed them. But most of them we just left exactly how they are. So there's this kind of feeling when you're cooking the recipes that you're cooking them as you would if you were sent them. You have the same questions, so it feels very intimate again. And also because I'm not from North America. I don't know, and most of the leaks are from the US. So that we only used one leek that wasn't from the US in the book, and then I had to learn all of this, North American food, and it was really interesting, and ingredients. So and try and replicate them here in Germany. So trying to replicate Velveeta cheese, which is this very iconic cheese, and having to make homemade kind of processed cheese, and having to make homemade, like all the materials I had to try and home make. So that was really fun, and I called my US friends a lot, being like, "What's this?" And it was just really, and then having the sizes, like you have to work out the serving sizes. So you're making a sauce that's for a church gathering that is for like 24 people, and then I've got this like really heavy pecan maple syrup sauce, I think, that goes on pork, and I've just got it, and I've got to eat it. So yeah, we ate a lot of food here, and like you said, my mom. Maybe you didn't say that. I couldn't make the meat and the fish recipe, so I outsourced that to my mother, who was very kind, and she made it all, and it was really nice because it felt then like a home cook, like it felt like a real cookbook. It was based on a family in a way, and so she cooked the recipes, and she would send me reports, and she would be left with this huge amount of food to eat. So it was an interesting process doing all of this.
It's so interesting because the recipes, I mean, I am half French and half American, and the recipes that are in the book are the majority of them are so classically American. And personally, I didn't grow up eating that food. It was sort of it was a special treat when we would go to American family members to try these things. And so even making this cookbook was like a rediscovery of my own culture, because I made it, and then of course you wanted to eat it because you didn't want it to go to waste. So I also ate myself through culture that I had never personally tasted either. Yeah. And made my husband the Death by Chocolate cake for his 40th birthday, just so you know. It's really delicious. Yeah.
It was actually my favorite tasting one of them all. Oh, it was so nice.
So dense, so good. I mean, his birthday also was, my photo shooting was also scheduled to correspond with his birthday, so we shouldn't tell him that, but yeah. I think it's an interesting, the intimacy that you talked about before, just being in people's lives, but also being in a culture, that you really get a sense by cooking the book, even by reading it, of what, a kind of literally a different sense of the culture from which this comes from. And it is primarily American. And you really, I think, start to etch a portrait of a culture in such a fascinating way. I find that also very compelling in this book.
It's super American, but in another way. Okay, two-thirds of the book is the recipes, but the other third of the book is about the menu, the 9 menu you build, about the story, and it's so, for me, from France, it's so international, because all the affairs they are not so American. The WikiLeaks and the Hillary Clinton email, both of these affairs had huge impacts worldwide. So at the end, it's super easy to grab the book and to go in the book and to totally understand the story behind all these American recipes.
Yes. So, like you said, the book is the cookbook, and then at the end there's these menus that we made. So the menus take the recipes, like 3 or 4 recipes, under a theme. So the themes range from menus about recipes by mothers. So there were some really interesting mother recipes that came out, low-calorie recipes that had really interesting stories. And then you had themes around voter interference, themes around conspiracy theories, and these kind of bigger questions, office culture, how many people swore in the emails? Did the way that they start their emails correspond with these big email studies I found? So it kind of took from these different themes. And yeah, like you're saying, when I started this project in 2017, the conspiracy theories were there, but they weren't anywhere like they are now in terms of what's happening with QAnon, and which has impacted a lot of countries outside of the US. And the Macron leaks haven't happened yet, I don't think, or maybe they had. And then you have Podesta, John Podesta, who was the campaign manager of Hillary Clinton, and his emails were hacked a month before the elections in 2016. In order to, people wanted to find things in his emails. So they were hacked a month before the elections and put on WikiLeaks, and no one could find anything. It was not interesting at all. In the words of, I think, Hillary Clinton, she said they were boring. But so then conspiracy theorists started to find things that they wanted to find, make links that, that really caused a lot of damage. From these emails, and some of them themselves were from the recipes. So one of them, Podesta, just to also highlight, he's a fantastic Italian chef. So he really likes Italian food. He's very classy as a chef, uses truffles, like just a really classy Italian. Like I learned about a walnut sauce from him. He makes this pasta with walnut sauce that is really delicious, actually. And apparently like it's an Italian sauce, and he's...
Did he cook for you?
Say that again?
Did he cook for you?
No. But he, so I learned these recipes, but I also learned about that these recipes had been at the center of a conspiracy theory, and I had no idea starting that project that a recipe had that big, could be read into and had code words. And so we touch on these themes that came out in the book, and I tried to write about them. I think, as Emilie says, it was really important for me to be somewhat playful. And I think that's because these issues are so scary and huge that I really like an entry point that people can engage in. And then you have these kind of more difficult things that come in as a way to bring people in. So then the rest of the book is the menus. And then one thing I learned from being next to you in IFA 2 years ago was how when you weren't there, I did performances when you weren't there, and it was deathly quiet because I had no music. And I didn't think about it, but when you were there, you had this really weird robot noises, and I didn't realize how helpful they were, some of the dinners. So because of that, I went through all the leaks again and found songs people shared. And then I made these playlists. So, and I made playlists around different themes. So at the end of the book, people can cook with music, because that was, I realized, very important.
But there's such a meta learning of like what makes us human within this too. You know, recipes are sets of instructions that are the scripts to human actions, and then what is the experience of the human action is specifically in food pleasure. And so it's interesting. I'm just having this thought now that there is this sort of meta, like you are rebuilding the human portrait and doing it also by asking yourself, you know, well, what makes it good? What makes it interesting?
This is funny because also I didn't realize that, because recipes are commonly used to understand algorithms. Like you understand how an algorithm works by putting ingredients and then you put them together and then something comes out at the end. And it's a common, people use it as a way to explain it. But then a lot of these recipes were used to create algorithms. Like the Enron leaks were used to create how our spam works, in modern day spam. It's used to create, in Gmail, where you have like, how would you like to reply bits, and they suggest a text. That came from the Enron emails, because the Enron emails are so, were used so much in computer science. So it's just, the thing with these recipe projects is it's endless. There's so many threads that come out about modern life just from this one one entry point.
Talking
It
about,
begs the-
oh, sorry.
Go
Lily.
ahead, Mathieu. Go ahead.
Talking about statistic and all these mathematics items, most of the recipes are sent by men in the book.
So no, most of the recipes are sent by women.
But most of the recipes by men are from them, like creation.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I did some number crunching, and it's not, I think it's pretty accurate, but yes, out of the 11 inventions in the book, like real inventions, 9 of them were from men. And most of I found that, yes, that 56% of the recipes were by women, but then the rest, I was seeing that the women were tending to send recipes that were kind of coordinating, like from partners who were saying, remind me about that recipe, or them saying, oh, please come to a dinner party and make this recipe. So it was just really interesting, but it's a completely unscientific study because I don't know how many of the recipe, I don't know how the company was made up, or but it was interesting. Some companies were much more foodie than others, so you had this real, like, I mean, everyone talks about doing their own cookbook themselves, which I did, yeah. So it was
It's
done.
done.
Really interesting. And then,
It's done.
Let's, please.
And then, like, the hacking team in Italy, no recipes at all. There was one recipe, but then it was just quite a sexist joke. So I was excited about. But it was, yeah, so it's very interesting what came out.
Maybe because recipes are really a secret in Italy. This is maybe my favorite recipes in the book. This is the secret recipes. The guy who texts his colleague and said to him, okay, this is really a secret recipe. This is a family recipes. Please don't share these recipes. And then we just published the recipes.
Yes. Luckily, I spoke to him. He said in his email, and they were swapping recipes, him and his colleague, and he said, please don't share this recipe. Men are like that with recipes. Keep this secret. So I did speak to him, and he gave me permission to publish his recipe. So yes, yeah, that one. But that one was a funny one. My favorite, I think, is the recipe where a son working in a company was emailing his mom and saying, hey, I want to cook more. Can you send me some recipes? Send me our family cookie recipe. And then his mom's like, oh, I'm out right now, but it's actually on the lid. I'm out right now, but essentially it's on a lid of a
cereal box.
Of it. And then it turned out, through reading it probably 20 times, I realized what she meant, and it was that the family secret cookie recipe came from the back of a cereal box, which was Quaker Oats. It was a Quaker Oats recipe, and I matched the Quaker Oats recipe that I found online with the ingredients, and they matched perfectly. And I knew that that's what she meant. So all this time, it was thought to be a family secret recipe, but it was just from a cereal box. And I was looking for his reply, and he never replied. So I wonder if he rang her and asked her about it. That was my guess.
In tears or not is the question. All these years.
Do you have, Emilie, favorite recipes in the book?
Oh, goodness. Well, I did tell you of my deep, gustatory love of the Death by Chocolate cake. It is delicious. So I think that I can make a recommendation live here on the internet. Cook and eat that one for the delight of all your family members. And 20 people should eat that thing, not 4, just so you know. So dense. I think that there was one that was maybe most fun to make because it was so challenging due to the location we were in, which was the trout recipe. And I was in a suburb of Chicago while making these during lockdown, and the recipe calls for a whole fish, a whole trout, which is not easy to come by in Joliet, Illinois. And so my genius mother said, wait, I do know where we can go. Because we called all the main supermarkets, everyone has fillets, no one has whole fish. And I had this image in my mind that it needed to be a whole fish. And so we ended up going to, there's a large Mexican population in this town. And so we ended up going to, she went to one of the Mexican supermarkets and asked for the whole fish, I believe along with my young toddler son as well, who's now gallivanting all around on these adventures at 2 years old. And and the man looks at her, and my mother also, to her incredible genius, speaks 5 languages, so she's also fluent in Spanish. So she most likely said this in Spanish to the man as well. And he looks at her and he's like, well, I'll cut it for you, I'll fillet. No, I want the whole thing. What? You want a whole fish? Like, aghast that someone would want the whole fish. Bagged it up, brought it home, and and so this one we ended up plating or styling next to a power strip. So multiple cords, wrapped it. What is even more interesting is like, the backstory and the off shots, because this was just a giant slippery fish in like a non-air conditioned basement in the middle of rather warm weather. You can also imagine the olfactory effect there. So I think this one was just incredible because it was slippery, it was hard to get, it was definitely a full family experience. So it also brought, I think, conflict and joy and all the things. And then we cooked it, and I regret to tell you that the fish was terrible. I'm sure the recipe was fine, but the fish was absolutely awful. So, and no one wanted to eat it at the end. But I think that the trout recipe, which I think is the hero image of the book, was really quite fun to make. As well as I think the surprises of the things that were delicious. I'll be honest that I went into it judgmental, believing that it was like trash and like anything that has Velveeta in it is terrible. And the beauty of this process is that because we were making them and eating them, we discovered actually a palate that was delicious, in ways that I think reflected back at me my own judgment, my own criticisms, my own lens onto my own culture, as I said before. So I also think it was personally, it was an interesting process for that reason too.
Well, I have to thank you and your family and your mother for going through that, because it's amazing. And I feel so honored that you did all that, because that image, I think, is one of my favorite images in the book. I have so many favorites, but that's really one of the top 5. So thank you for going through all that effort.
You're so welcome. I really wanted to wrap up a fish. I mean, that one is also like, the secret behind that is that I think it is a bondage image. There's this cord from the power strip, and all I wanted to do was like wrap the fish, and it's sort of like stuck in this electrical cord with these like very twee stylings, like little half tomatoes and pieces of onions and some like parsley. It's very pretty, but then it has this completely industrial sort of, again, this tension. I think that was just such joy to experience. That's the inspiration behind that image.
It was the same idea for the mushrooms on the cover.
Oh, this is my telephone. So this is my phone.
Oh my god!
This is my phone. This is my fancy iPhone. And you're a little blurry there.
Yeah, it's blurry. It's not a face.
Yeah, for me now.
Good. Yeah, slippery cords. Yeah, that one. There were a lot of personal. Actually, and that power strip also comes from my father's basement shop. He had actually in this was interesting too, that this house specifically, that my parents moved into it when I went to college. So I did not grow up there, but I spent the other half of my life going back there as home. And my father grew up there, and his mother was a photographer, and my grandfather built a darkroom in the basement for her. And my father also practiced as a photographer as his last career, one of three. And so photography has always been something that I think is in us, specifically in his family. So it was this reconnection also to that part, again, of my own culture, but also of my own family, to be able to, I set up a full studio right next to it. And though this was not, an analog, but it was digital photography that was being created, it was also an evolution of this human story, which I think is interesting in parallel with this book, which continues to evolve, our own human narrative through different technology. So I borrowed some pieces of, ancient technology, like his power strip is next to that trout. My phone is the cover. That I will tell you, there were a lot of different mushroom images, and then I looked at my telephone and thought, my gosh, how strange would it be to make like a pop socket, these little devices that you put on the back of your phones to hold them. Like, how strange would it be if it was a mushroom? Colors kind of match, and then I borrowed some rubber bands also from the home and just rubber banded those mushrooms to the phone. And I think it has this bizarre relationship to human skin, to like wrapping technology, forcing something together, collaging it. And then on this like pastel purple background is just, it's quite dreamy. I think it's one of my favorite images.
Me too, definitely. Maybe my last question will be about Culture Office, because we just gone through 2020, which was such a strange year. Everyone working from home. Do you think the next step, the next Culture Office will change and will be different? Do you think we can have another leak so strong and so important like this one after this book, after all this affair?
I mean, I might, Emilie, if you've got a good answer to this one, I doubt you.
To me, goodness.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is your territory more than mine. I can speak about it off the cuff. That I think culture in general, hopefully we never fall into our old habits again. Hopefully we have created systems, that will not allow us to do this and expose people in this way. That said, we will always find a way. What is the next frontier of this? Like, where is the next level of, of conspiracy, conflict, private lives? We're constantly, and this is, I think, the radical part about being alive in this moment, is that never before has our technology gone so fast. We're up against speed now as people in ways that we never have before. So, we have artificial intelligence now within us, almost around us. What will that mean? Even for identity, like the notion, I think, of private lives is something that will deconstruct very soon. And I think it has such huge implications for our culture, right? And for our identity. So those are questions I have. I have no doubt that we will continue to do just this in different ways, and I then also have no doubt that on the other side of it, there is also light, and there is also people working against this, and commentary being made and knowledge being shared. We will, I think, always be in this constant slate of attempting equilibrium as we spin around our little sun for as long as we can. So I think that, just from a cultural point of view, is something that I think about, both with hope and despair.
Yes, that was really nicely put. I sometimes think about what's the next leaked recipes in terms of like are we going to find like poems leaked from Slack, or like all of these different themes leaked from these platforms that we feel completely comfortable using, that have a huge amount of information on. So I think it's going to only continue. And I think as more people try to go to other platforms away from email, because it's interesting because Enron was before social media, and they were sharing lots of information by email. And I wonder why Enron was so foodie is I wonder if other companies shifted to other platforms later, and that's why email might not have such rich information, but you might get it from other places. And as people are trying to go off major platforms to smaller platforms, and I don't know. So I think Emilie put it really nicely. I think that I worry and I try. I think with this book, it was very interesting, how unsafe your companies are in a way. Like the companies, really didn't protect their staff, I think, in a lot of the instances here. And I hope that improves and that the security of people's employment improves. Yes, but I don't know if the next one will be short stories on Slack or something like this.
Imagine what comes out of TikTok. Good one. That's the next frontier. You and your bounces. Well, come on.
But then maybe you're right. Maybe everyone's much more public now. But people want people to see things. People want people to see TikToks versus like what's a private. Yeah, like how private are we anymore or public?
So we are more in self-control.
I think, or we're more. I think there's a lot of sharing, I suppose, of people's private lives online, probably much more than they used to be, of course. So yeah, I don't. It's a tough question, but I worry about the new technology. I remember recently Parler, the app for kind of like a free speech app. These are my fingers doing this with the blur. It was that was scraped and put online, and it was like a huge amount of data was put online of people's usernames and passwords and videos they'd shared, and it was completely unsecured. So it's happening still all the time. But I hope with this project we put out some. I worked with Mozilla, the internet company, and we put out some guidance on how to secure your tips for privacy and security. So that was one element of the project in its early stages. But yeah, it's a tough question, Matthew.
Sorry. I want to thank you, Emilie and Demetria, for tonight. Maybe very soon our next talk will be on House Club. This is the next platform now. This is the future.
Yeah. Clubhouse is where it's at. Elon Musk has joined. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to
this app already has loads of privacy implications. Sorry, I'm finished now.
And of course, thank you again to Printed Matter Virtual Art Book Fair to host this call. Thank you to the MIT and ITFA who support our project and to bring us together a few years ago. I hope you enjoy. I love you, and we talk soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you. So nice to spend this hour together, you three.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
Speak soon. Bye.
It's okay. Girls?